No one expected this. For over 2 centuries, the idea of a United States has been more than just a name. It's been a promise, a belief that no matter how divided the country might become, the Union would always hold. But that belief is now being tested in ways not seen since the Civil War. Across the nation, states are pulling in different directions, politically, economically, and even culturally. And beneath the surface, a quiet but powerful movement is gaining momentum. The idea that some states might be better off on their own. It sounds impossible, until you look closer. The cracks in the foundation are everywhere. Deep political divisions, broken trust in federal institutions, rising separatist sentiment, and open talk of sovereignty. In some state legislatures, proposals once dismissed as fringe are now entering the mainstream. Bills to challenge federal laws, create state-controlled currencies, or even organize referendums on independence. While still symbolic, these moves reveal something much deeper. The sense that the glue holding America together is weakening. Texas, for example, has long flirted with the idea of going its own way. The Secede movement, once a joke, is now being taken seriously by a growing number of residents. Polls show that a significant portion of Texans support the concept of independence, citing frustration with federal oversight, border policy, and taxation. In 2023, a state representative even introduced a bill to hold a vote on secession. It failed, but the message was clear: the idea isn't going away. Then there's California. As the 5th largest economy in the world, the Golden State often acts like a nation unto itself, with its own climate laws, international partnerships, and sprawling bureaucracy. Some Californians argue that the federal government slows progress and interferes with the state's global ambitions. The Calexit movement may not have the same grassroots energy as Secede, but its intellectual base is strong, and growing louder each time a national election swings in a direction California voters reject. Alaska, geographically isolated and resource-rich, has its own reasons to question the Union. It has long harbored an independent streak, with a population that feels culturally and politically distinct from the lower 48. The Alaska Independence Party, though small, has endured for decades, and its core message is simple: why should Alaskans send their wealth to Washington when they could govern themselves? Hawaii, too, carries a unique historical grievance. Once a sovereign kingdom, it was annexed in a process that remains controversial to this day. Among native Hawaiians, the call for restoration of independence is not just political, it's personal. Movements like the Hawaiian Sovereignty Restoration and Office of Hawaiian Affairs have made real gains in the cultural and legal spheres. And in times of federal failure, like during natural disasters or economic crises, those calls grow louder. But it's not just the outliers. Even states like Florida, Idaho, Oregon, and even Vermont are experiencing growing secessionist chatter, each for different reasons. In Florida, political polarization and federal conflict over immigration and public health have driven some to question the value of union. In Idaho and parts of eastern Oregon, rural residents want to break away from their more liberal state governments and realign with areas that share their conservative values. Some even advocate redrawing state borders, a movement gaining surprising traction under the banner of Greater Idaho. And then there's Vermont, small, peaceful, and historically independent-minded. The state once declared itself a republic in the 18th century, before joining the Union. Now, groups like the Second Vermont Republic advocate a return to that status. Their argument? That a decentralized, locally governed society is better equipped to survive a volatile century. The reasons vary, but the pattern is the same. Americans are losing faith, not just in their leaders, but in the very structure of the country. Federal policies that fail to adapt to regional realities, a Supreme Court seen as unrepresentative, and the sense that one-size-fits-all governance no longer works are all driving forces. The pandemic accelerated these divides. So did the chaos of recent elections. So do widening income gaps and unchecked corporate influence. What's left is a nation fraying at the seams, not with open rebellion, but with quiet erosion. None of this means secession is imminent. Legally, it remains virtually impossible under the Constitution. But laws don't always contain movements, and movements don't need immediate victories to change the course of history. What we're witnessing now is the normalization of a once taboo idea, that America might not always be 50 states. That the flag might not always have 50 stars. That the Union might not be forever. And while the federal government insists the nation is strong, the ground tells a different story. Trust in Washington is near record lows. Congress is gridlocked. The executive branch is polarized. And the judiciary is increasingly viewed through a partisan lens. In this environment, states are beginning to chart their own paths, not just rhetorically but structurally. They are building their own economic alliances, defying federal regulations, and in some cases, refusing to enforce federal law entirely. The world is watching. A fractured America would send shockwaves through global markets, alliances, and security structures. But inside the country, the conversation is already moving past if and toward how. How could secession work? Could it be peaceful? Could states survive on their own? These aren't questions from radical corners. They're being asked in classrooms, on talk radio, and around dinner tables. We are living in a moment of profound uncertainty. The United States is still one nation, but it is not a united one. The movements growing quietly across its map reflect something far more dangerous than protest. They reflect a loss of belief in the future as currently written. And if that belief continues to fade, the consequences will not be theoretical. They will be historical. And now, in the shadows of growing political polarization and cultural fragmentation, even state governments themselves are starting to prepare for a reality in which federal cohesion can no longer be assumed. Some lawmakers have begun drafting contingency plans, legal frameworks that would allow their states to assert more autonomy in the event of a constitutional breakdown or federal collapse. These aren't science fiction scenarios. They're being discussed quietly in policy circles, especially in states where the idea of federal overreach has become a rallying cry. Texas, once again, leads the charge. The state has already created its own power grid, controls its National Guard more independently than most, and maintains the rhetoric of self-reliance in its political DNA. Some legal scholars in Texas have gone so far as to explore how the state could gradually detach itself from federal financial systems and judicial oversight without declaring outright independence. The strategy is called practical secession, not through war, but through quiet, systematic disengagement. Meanwhile, Florida is flexing its political muscle in different ways. Its government has increasingly used legal and administrative tools to push back on federal mandates, from education standards to immigration enforcement. These are not isolated incidents. They are signals of a growing desire to operate as a sovereign entity in all but name. When combined with cultural narratives that emphasize Florida's uniqueness, its history, climate, and identity, a subtle sense of separation is being cultivated among residents, especially younger generations. This rising sentiment is not always about ideology. In some cases, it's about survival. States facing extreme weather, economic crises, or infrastructure collapse are beginning to ask, can we afford to wait for Washington? Can we continue to rely on federal systems that are slow to act, politically paralyzed, or financially unstable? The answer, increasingly, is no, and so, states begin to invest in their own emergency response networks, their own supply chains, even their own currencies, not because they're seceding today, but because they're no longer confident in tomorrow. And while these measures may appear cautious or pragmatic on the surface, they're laying the groundwork for something far more radical. Once states build the systems to operate independently, the psychological leap toward full separation becomes easier. And once public sentiment aligns with structural capacity, it may no longer matter what the Constitution says. The federal government faces a dilemma it has not truly grappled with since the 1860s. How do you hold together a country where growing portions of the population no longer want to be part of it? Unlike the Civil War, today's tension isn't built on geography alone. It's ideological. Urban versus rural, globalist versus nationalist, centralized versus decentralized. The fault lines run through states, through cities, through families. Technology is amplifying this divide. With the rise of decentralized media, people no longer share a national narrative. The internet has become a battlefield of competing realities, where citizens in the same country can believe they live in two different nations, or should. Online communities devoted to state independence have grown rapidly in recent years, feeding the perception that secession is not only possible, but desirable. These digital echo chambers turn local frustrations into organized sentiment, and in time, organized action. Even the military is watching these developments with growing unease. While the U.S. armed forces are bound by oath to defend the Constitution, internal studies have raised concerns about unit cohesion in the event of domestic unrest tied to state-led defiance. What happens if state governments openly defy federal orders and local law enforcement refuses to intervene? What if a state refuses to recognize the outcome of a national election, or to implement a ruling from the Supreme Court? These are no longer academic hypotheticals. In the last decade, some of them have already occurred, in miniature. What's unclear is how far they could go. And then there's the economic reality. Some states now openly question whether being part of the Union is a net gain. States like New York and California argue that they give more to the federal government than they receive in return. Others, like Mississippi or West Virginia, are more dependent on federal funding but remain culturally disconnected from national institutions. This fiscal imbalance feeds resentment on both ends, a sense that the system no longer benefits everyone equally, and that the redistribution of wealth has become a source of division rather than unity. All of this points to one sobering truth: the American Union, long thought to be unshakable, is under quiet siege, not from external enemies, but from within. And if the trend continues unchecked, the map of the United States may not look the same in 20 years. It may not take a declaration, a war, or a dramatic collapse. It may happen slowly, piece by piece, as laws are ignored, institutions lose relevance, and people simply stop believing in the system. What began as whispers in fringe circles has now become a chorus in statehouses, courtrooms, and kitchen tables. And that chorus is growing louder. Not with violence, but with disillusionment. Not with chaos, but with calculation. A belief that the system cannot be saved, and that maybe, just maybe, it's time to build something new. Because this is only the beginning.